Wow, we've got 500 people watching. Hello. 500 people watching a coaching session. It's pretty sick. Where am I going wrong? What am I f***ing up? We could do one of these every day, I'm sure.
Alrighty. So how are you thinking this through? Like, what's going through your head when you're in a spot like this?
I'm thinking, I guess, how I would value bet is first and foremost. Then I'm thinking about how wide my opponent's range is. Then I'm thinking about like the equity that my hand has. I think, in particular, in position. Obviously, this is something that we touched on yesterday about, bet folding equity. I tend to shy away, like this spot, just as an example, I would tend to shy away from betting hands that aren't going to do well with a check raise. Like, let's say I have some flush draws here, or a hand like ace king, ace jack. Now, for me, I would tend to check those sorts of hands behind more, particularly like ace high flush draws, or like probably more, particularly a hand like ace king or ace jack or king jack. Maybe I've become too unwilling to barrel good equity hands in position. Tend to take free cards. So I know, looking at this, our hand is worth very little. We can apply pressure to a 4 or 7. Obviously some 10s down the line. We have plenty of value combos. You know, we have all the sets. We have some 2 pairs. Probably maybe not queen 7 suited, but depends how I'm feeling. Imagine that this is a sort of hand that's quite nice to barrel on the turn, given that it's not really worth much for a check back. There are some, we can check back good equities in position so that we don't get check jammed on. Maybe not at 40, but not unrealistic at 40 that he puts us in a miserable spot sometimes with a check jam. I tend to barrel. My out of position barrels tend to be quite equity driven, and my in position, I tend to check back things that can realize more and barrel more sort of waste of space hands, of which this seems quite reasonable. Something you mentioned to me a lot as well about like some of the worst like offsuit combos in our range. A lot of the time you want to start thinking about like how those interact, and like barreling, bluffing some of those. So that's something I think about too.
So the one thing that I think that you didn't say that I think would be helpful to think about is, and you want to have, and you're probably doing it by default without mentioning it, is it's really helpful to think about like the range on range interaction in terms of how this card interacts with your range overall.
Sure. Yeah.
So again, that's probably something that you think about that you just didn't mention.
Right. I've not articulated that.
Yeah, sure. But this is a big deal for that specifically, right? So when the turn is a queen, there are a few things that happen. First, it's disconnected from the board, right? So it doesn't impact or interact with the opponent's check calling range, right? He's not check calling a bunch of queen high hands, right? He's check calling a pair of 10s, a pair of 4s, a pair of 7s, a flush draw, straight draws, right? But that doesn't mean that he's check calling anything with a queen in it. So from his perspective, the queen's not very good. He doesn't interact with this, right? A 9 would be more beneficial for the opponent, right? An 8, a 6, a 5, a club, right? Those are cards, right? A 7, a 4. Those are cards that the opponent would have interaction with because they check call the flop, and the types of hands that they're likely to check call the flop would interact with those types of cards on the turn. But the queen is not one of those cards. Now that's for them, right? For you, you're c-betting most of your range on the flop, if not all of it, right? So with regards, like if you're going to bet small, you could just bet to range here on the flop if you're going to bet small. This is a board where you probably want to be betting larger fairly often, but we bet small, so it implies that we're probably betting most of our range here. When we catch this card, if we're betting range, which again seems reasonable considering our bet size on the flop, then what is in our range, right? Well, if we're opening from the hijack, it's basically just Broadway. It's not a very difficult range to think about. We're opening Broadway, so that means we want to pay attention to the offsuit side. Okay, so we're paying attention to the offsuit part of our range. So Broadway just smashes this turn, right? If you think about Broadway as the lowest card being a 10, well, that's a pair. Lowest card's a jack, that's a straight draw, right? So it's either a straight draw or a pair. Queen jack, king jack, straight draw, ace jack, straight draw, right? Then the lowest card's a queen in our range, that's a pair, okay? And then if the lowest card's a king, that's going to be ace king, and that's going to be straight draw. So once the turn's the queen of hearts, we have either a straight draw or a pair on the offsuit side. There's no room for anything else. So that's a really powerful card for you on a relative basis. And so the c-bet frequency is going to be so high that it's going to drag in pretty much all of the hands that look kind of like this, right? Yeah. And this is a mistake that a lot of more casual players would make, right? Which is just like they don't recognize just how powerful this card is.
Yep.
Like you just get to just plow money in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is pure bet, but all the hands that look like this are pure bet. So ace 6 is a pure bet, ace 5 is pure bet, ace deuce is going to be like pretty much pure bet, ace 3 is pure bet, king 6 is going to be pure bet, king 5, right? And these are hands that don't look like bluffs because most people want to be equity driven, right? They want to have something when they're betting, but you don't need to have something here. You can just kind of, like I said, plow money in. So, and then we end up,
boom, and then this seems pretty bad because
a different plan.
This is pretty. I mean, obviously I have the full block of ace-high flushes, but this is more probably me thinking that people make bigger sizes with flushes and just, I don't know, getting again. It's kind of similar to I was yesterday, right? I'm just like forcing it, getting really out of line. Like I just have the world's easiest turn barrel, but I don't take it, and then I take some bluff into a range that has full weight suited defend from the big blind.
Yeah, I would say this looks like forcing it again. That's pretty solid language there. Yeah, like you don't have to do this. When you do raise, first of all, raising is not something that we do a lot in no limit, right? Like we don't raise the river like a bunch.
Yeah.
We raise the river sometimes, but it's not it's not going to be a 50% play, right? It's going to be like a 15% play. So when we think about how we do it, for the most part, it'll be helpful to just think about how this guy will call, right? Again, like I try to teach people how to think about no limit, right? If you use solvers, I use solvers all the time, right? But if you just use the solver and you just like look at the answer, that doesn't really help you with how to think. You need to be able to show your work, basically. Like, how did you get to this answer, right? You think about it like being in math class as a kid, right? If you just get the right answer, the teacher's going to think you cheated in a lot of instances, right? Like you need to be able to show your work for the step-by-step process to get to the right answer, because the right answer alone isn't enough. And a solver shows you the right answer, which is great, right? But you need to be able to show your work. And most of the process of showing your work here comes down to just thinking about, how is this guy going to call if I raise, right? And then you want to remove those possibilities, okay? So obviously having a club in your hand, right?
Yeah.
How is this guy going to call or raise, right? How's this guy going to call or raise? Probably with a flush. So if you manage to have a club here, that would be pretty advantageous for bluffing. This hand just, how's this guy going to call here? I mean, I don't know, but I can't imagine it's going to be with the ace of spades.
He could have ace jack, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's
he just has a very, very large amount of flushes in his range and two pairs in his range that this does nothing against, right?
And then when it comes down to a hand like ace jack, which I agree with, he could definitely have ace jack. What you want to try to do is if you recognize that maybe you have you're blocking a hand that he could call with, but you have a lot of hands that block how he could call. With that hand, then you have to differentiate between those hands, right? So then you have to pick, okay, ace 5 does in fact block ace jack, but is it the best way to block ace jack? Because of course I could bluff with ace 7 or ace 4 or ace 10, or maybe I could have ace x with a club. So, right, if you have a lot of ways to block ace jack, then you have to.
I could have ace 9 with the 9 of clubs and block jack 9 too.
Sure, something like that. Yeah. There you go. Cool.
Wow.
So having the 5 of clubs would have been nice.
Deserved. Jordan's actually filtered for, he's just run a filter that says all the worst hands Spraggy's ever played, and then we just go through those every day.
Sure. Something like that. It's close to that. I'm looking for mistakes. I am looking for mistakes. So this is not like, I'm not looking for the strong points in Spraggy's database, and then we're going to cover those, right? So that's going to be somewhat true, at least. Yeah, sure. So you're up again. How do you think about this?
Obviously, we're playing very different range in the small blind than we are big blind. I'd imagine this is like quite focused around King X, some broadways, some suited connectors, some ace X, and then thinking about my range. Obviously, I have a similar one. I'm opening Broadway, ace X, pairs. When we don't get check raised, I still think there's a reasonable amount of queen X. Maybe some pairs like 5s or 8s, and this turn gives those a little bit more equity. Doesn't really improve like many of my hands. I don't make any straights, so I don't make any 2 pairs on the turn. But I still have a queen X block to bluff with, and this might be one of my worst offsuit combos that I open. I guess I have like Jack 10-0, but maybe this and like King 10-0. But maybe we should be barreling here since we, block some queen X that he'll call in the small blind, and like I say, one of the worst offsuit combos we have, sort of non-equity, not non-equity, but like some of our flush draws at 25 blinds I might want to check back so I don't get jammed on. Like if I have a hand like ace 5 of hearts, I might just want to check, or even like ace 10 of hearts. But maybe we should just be barreling this.
Okay, so the first thing is, you can recognize, I think most people will be able to look at this board and say, I probably don't want to bet range on this card, right? Like this
Yeah.
is not like the best card in the deck for you on a relative basis,
Nope.
right? So you're going to have checks. So the question becomes like, how do you want to differentiate between like king jacks and jack tens, and king tens and king nines, and ace jacks or ace nines or ace eights, right? Like, do you have a mechanism that you're going to use?
I mean, I would look at this and like king of diamonds is kind of nice to me, I suppose, because he still has like king high backdoors if he chooses to peel hearts, clubs, or spades. So like I would imagine that we double barrel something with a diamond, because his first folds are like king jack of hearts or king jack of clubs, if he chooses to float these, or indeed like ace high hearts, clubs, and spades. So I don't know, having a diamond seems good, but maybe it's better with the jack because he doesn't have ace king. So like king of diamonds is not relevant for the ace x block. I don't know.
Yeah, so we're gonna want. It's good. So I mean, you're talking about different ways to essentially, like, what looks to a lot of people who don't study, right? It looks like mixing, right? But it's not really mixing in terms of you can actually, in a lot of cases, you can choose the suits deliberately to accomplish goals that you actually want to accomplish, right? So here we're going to have a one heart bias first, okay? So we're looking for a heart first, right? Because we want to block flush draws from check jamming on us, right? Or check calling. So first we're going to start with a one heart bias towards as a blocker. So the jack of hearts would have been a nice card to have. We're going to try to stay away from having a club or spade as much as possible. And then we're going to move towards having a diamond to the extent possible. So the ideal pairing is going to be like a diamond heart pairing, right? Like we're talking about king jack offsuit, so we're not talking about flush draws. We're talking about two hearts. We're looking for ideally like a diamond heart pairing for barreling here. This is probably not stupid because it's the king of hearts specifically. The high card in your hand matters most, right? So the king of hearts will be a better barrel than the jack of hearts on average, okay? The king of spades will be a worse barrel than the jack of spades, right? The king of clubs will be a worse barrel than the jack of clubs. So at the margin, having the king of diamonds is a bit helpful. King jack's like not bad. We don't have a heart. It kind of sucks, but yeah, this hand could definitely barrel. And then you ended up calling the river, which seems defensible. So it's a wide flop call. Yeah, I'm like, he did call the flop, right? But
he knows I don't barrel enough.
Yeah. I don't know what he knows. I don't know what he knows.
They're on to me.
Okay, you're up again.
Okay, so this is probably a spot like the one that I was saying about. Like, whenever I feel like I have equity here, wow, I'm not sure how relevant it is 63 blinds, but the turn card feels like kind of neutral. Like, it doesn't really improve any of his, backdoor diamonds. It doesn't improve any of my, misses on the flop. Neither of us really make that many two pairs, since he probably doesn't have 4-2 off, 9-4 off. I mean, maybe he does. So the turn doesn't seem particularly problematic. Like, I don't think I should be playing like high frequency check or anything. But I suppose when I'm selecting bluffs, I want to look at the worst offsuit opens, like you say, where the bottom of my range is. Maybe I barrel some offsuit, like lower suited king X rather than this, since I dominate hands like 10-8 and jack 10 that he might float. Like, making shared eights isn't necessarily bad, but maybe I'm mistaken in that thinking I have not showdown value, but at this depth, like, if I get check raised, I guess I am just folding. Maybe that's a little bit too much to bet fold. So I tend to check back more with these. I suppose I have jack 10, king 10 here as well, like bottom of my offsuit range. I don't know whether that means I should bet it more so than like how miserable it is when we have to potentially fold, 7-8s if he check raises us.
One of the main risks around barreling those equity-driven combos is actually being check raised off, right? So this won't be the easiest situation for someone to check raise into, right?
Sure.
The mechanics differ a little bit when people get deeper than when they're shorter, right? So when they're deeper, it gets a little more challenging to check call the flop with sets, right? Because you have like poker is an opportunity cost game. You can use an opportunity cost framework to understand most of the game, right? So when you're really shallow, if you have a really strong hand like a set, right, then you can play passively. You can check call, right? And you can still win most stuff, if not all, of your opponent's stack at a pretty high frequency, right? Like if you have 10 big blinds, you can check call the flop, check turn, jam the river, right? And still stack your opponent.
Yeah.
Okay. When you have 100 big blinds, that doesn't work, right? Like if you want an opportunity to stack your opponent, it's going to make a big difference if you check raise the flop. Okay.
Yeah.
So the deeper you get, the harder it gets, the more challenging it gets to check call some of those really strong hands. So what ends up happening is it gets much more challenging than, the corollary to that is that it's much more challenging now for your opponent to check raise the turn if you polarize your range on the turn. And that's going to be how you do this, right? Like on blank turns that don't fill out any draws. Okay. So the 4 of hearts is a perfect example, right? So you're going to be overbetting as a bet size. Okay. So what happens here is we bet the flop, and if he has a really strong hand, he'll check raise. Okay. So if he has queen 9, he'll check raise. If he has a set of 9s or deuces, he'll check raise. Okay. So he decides to call. All right. So what that means is that we're up against queen 10. We're up against queen 8. We're up against 9x. We're up against 2x. We're up against draws. So the 4 doesn't reintroduce really strong hands to his range. Obviously, he could have pocket 4s with a spade. For people paying attention, he could have a hand like that. But he doesn't have a lot of hands like that. Right? He doesn't have a lot of those types of hands. So when we overbet the turn, which is okay, first of all, when we think about bet sizing, our opponent's range is mostly capped. Okay.
Right.
So we're going to be choosing bet sizes that facilitate us getting our entire stack in. And we want to bet similar fractions as similar as possible on the turn in the river. So betting smaller than an overbet gets in the way of our ability to get our stack in the middle on the river. Okay, betting really small doesn't really help us to accomplish that goal. So you can think about betting as being like purpose driven. You're not just betting just to bet. Like you're not picking your bet size just arbitrarily. The bet sizes are chosen deliberately, right? So if we're trying to get our stack in with pocket 9s or pocket 4s or ace queen or pocket kings, what bet size accomplishes that against someone that's probably not going to check raise much because they're capped, right? Probably an overbet.
Yep.
Okay. So we're probably going to overbet the turn. And then again, the guy's mostly capped, so he's probably not going to raise much. So that's going to help us to bet hands that are a little more equity driven that you kind of are
right.
That you might shy away from.
Right. Because he just doesn't really have an ability to check raise turn.
It's going to be hard to check raise turn on this.
The
card,
EV
right?
cost for him of being able
to
do that is that he calls queen deuce, queen 9, 9 deuce more. But this is in terms of strategy, he's just torching EVs so that he can check raise my imposition equity bluffs, right? Like there's just that upside isn't worth it for him, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the reason, and a big part of the reason the upside's not worth it for him is because on the one hand, you are betting the turn that way with at a frequency, right? But you're going to check half the time. Okay?
Yeah,
you are going to check half the time. So he's going to be check calling with those hands that you mentioned, those really strong hands, and then the turn's going to go check, and now there's going to be now what? Like now, what do you want to do with those hands, right? So yeah, so this is a viable overbet, but it's more like I was trying to speak to the fact that Jack 10 would be a viable overbet, or the fact that a flush draw here would be a viable overbet. And I wanted to sort of like tone down your expectations of being check raised, right?
Yes.
Because you're like, I'm concerned about being check raised and pissing away some equity, and I'm like, well, in this situation, this guy's pretty capped and not going to be as much of a problem as you might think. Okay, and then so how do you think about this on the river?
Well, if we're polar on the turn, my thought is here, I still have a reasonable 9x block, hands like pocket 10s, pocket jacks, obviously, that choose not to bet, be it overbet or otherwise on the turn. So, a queen kind of, I'm going to want to value bet probably all my 9x plus here. Depending on opponent, I don't know, maybe I go even thinner, underneath the 9. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have value bets, and this is, again, Jack 10-0, King 10-0 here. Worst opposite combinations that I have. So, I don't know, if I reopen some value bets, then I want to bluff some stuff too.
Sure. So this is probably the problem with King 10 is you're starting to get too high up. So your thinking is still reasonable. Like Jack 10 should be bluffed here for sure, in my opinion. King Jack definitely shouldn't be bluffed here, and King 10 is going to be really close. Now, why do I think that? It's because all of your value bets, I actually agree with you. So I think that you said, hey, I'd value bet all of my 9x here. Yep. Great. Here's the problem. That's all suited. So right. So there's 3. You have ace 9 offsuit specifically.
But we got 9 combos of 9x, right?
Yeah. So it's not you just don't have a lot coming from that part of the deck. You have more than 9, I think, but it's not a lot. It's not a lot.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Way more.
Yeah, a little bit more than that. But it's still not a lot. And so if you think about betting in no limit, It's just the pairing of value bets and bluffs, right? Bluffs don't exist in a vacuum on their own. Bluffs are attached to value bets, right? You need to have value bets in order to bluff, and then you just bluff at a corresponding ratio. So the fewer value bets we have in a given situation, the fewer bluffs we're going to have. And so in this situation, you'll have, jacks would be probably a pretty high frequency one, actually, right? That we didn't mention, pocket jacks, pocket tens, because you're going to bet the flop and then check back the turn all the time.
Yeah.
Two hands. So you'll have jacks, tens, and then you'll have like suited 9x, and then that's pretty much calling it a day as far as the value bets. And you'll have suited bluffs that are trash. So you'll have like 7, 8 of diamonds, for example, right? You'll get here with that. Or 7, 8 of clubs is not going to be pure turn barrel. So you'll have some hands like that, in addition to Jack 10. And my concern is mostly like we just don't have enough value bets to start pulling in. When the board blanks, so this is a bigger idea, like a bigger picture idea. When the board blanks, you want to just be somewhat careful about over bluffing. And when the board completes and fills out, then you want to be careful about over checking with bluffs, right? So the risk goes in two directions, right? If the board totally blanks, then the risk is that you bluff too much.
Yeah.
And if the board completely fills out, then the risk is that you don't bluff enough, right? So here, the board, especially with the board, the turn being a 4, which obviously doesn't subtract any bluffs from your range, and then the river being a queen, which again doesn't subtract any bluffs from your range, the risk is skewed towards bluffing too much, and you want to be careful about managing that exposure relative to a board where, like, let's say the river was a jack, right? Well, if the river's a jack, now all of your king 10s filled, all of your jack 10s filled, all of your ace jacks filled, right? So like your range is just filling out if the river's a jack, relative to the range filling out if the river's a queen, right? So the risk on a jack river would be that you don't bluff enough, that you don't recognize that you've lost all these bluffs, and now you have to go find bluffs, and that's going to mean bluffing with hands like ace high. Okay. Whereas on this river, even though you have king high, it's not going to be as appropriate to bluff because you just have too many candidates in the spot. All right.
Yep.
Cool. So how are you thinking about larger bet sizes when you deploy them? What are you using to make the judgments?
Like how many made nutted hands does my opponent have? Obviously, this is a board texture that's very good for me. We have asymmetry around the strongest king X, I would assume, with ace king, and yeah, they don't have any made straights. It's very hard for them to defend flush draws. Obviously, there are none. There are no straight draws other than the broadways that I have. So, maybe like I should be pulling my king X into a bigger size here, because it's hard for them to defend. They just have to pull defense from Jack X, and my kings want to punish that fact, I suppose. So this feels like a board where I can bet big. I have this heuristic in my mind that anything with any board with a deuce on, there is going to be some small bets.
That's cool. That's actually a pretty common one that people reference a lot. It's true. So like, yeah, the boards that have a deuce on it more often than not will bet smaller.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's fine. Like that's cool. This board is one of the heuristics that can be helpful. So first of all, if you're going to pick one size, the small size is great here. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're doing what I would be doing if I was playing, then I would be splitting. And there's lots of reasons not to split, right? The reasons not to split would just be like, it's much easier to keep track of my range if I don't. If I just use one bet size on the flop, it's way easier. Do I really need to split? Is it really worth the work? Blah, 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 blah. I tend to go the other way and think that I'll keep track of my range better than my opponents will. And I'm not going to do a perfect job of it. I'm not going to know exactly what my range is on the turn or the river. When I split, I'm not saying that I will because I'm like arrogant and I'm going to know better than everybody else. I won't know exactly what my range is on the turn or river, neither will my opponent, but I'll have a better idea of what it is than they will. And that's really what No Limit Hold'em's about. No Limit Hold'em's about a relative edge. It's not about an absolute edge. So I like the idea of splitting on boards like this, where there aren't any combo draws. So which happens on rainbow textures. So rainbow textures have a particular kind of like feature, which is that as you bet really, really, really big, so like as you pot it or as you overbet the flop, your opponents can't add any hands that have like neutral equity against the hands you're value betting. So what do I mean by that? So what I mean specifically is on this particular board, if I overbet with pocket aces, my opponent has to defend his range mathematically against my bet size. Okay, no matter how he chooses to do that, he can't just like add 2 parent sets and call it a day. Okay, so no matter how he chooses to do that, there's just no hand available for him that has great equity against pocket aces.
Yep.
There aren't any, right? Whereas, so he can't move his range towards hands that do really well against my larger value bets here, okay? Whereas if the board were two-tone, right, then there's lots of hands actually that have great equity against pocket aces, right? So if my value, because my value doesn't change. It doesn't matter if it's rainbow or two-tone. If I want to bet really big, it's going to be like pretty dense aces, ace, king, maybe king, queen. And then, maybe the bottom end set. So maybe deuces, certainly not kings, certainly not jacks, not really dense king, jack. Okay. So again, if I'm going to use a really large size, it's going to be aces, ace, king, king, queen, maybe the bottom end set. Okay. That's going to be the value component, whether it's a two-tone texture or a rainbow texture. The advantage to the rainbow texture when it comes to the larger bets is that no matter how my opponent moves his range around, he can't have good equity against those hands.
Yep.
There's just nothing he can do. But again, if the board was king, jack, deuce, two-tone, then he could start calling with like queen, 10 of spades. If it's king, jack, deuce with two spades, you can start check calling queen, 10 of spades, 10, 9 of spades, ace, 10 of spades. And you see, I don't have good equity against those hands. So his range is starting to move in a way that's not advantageous for me at all when I use the big bet there. So I really just, when I'm paying attention to these rainbow textures, I personally deploy more of a mixing strategy. I do like including the larger bet sizes, but this is fine. So.
Yeah. This similar is why you see the big bets on like the 10 high, 9 high, like disconnected rainbow boards, right?
Yeah,
because like they have to just draw from shit pairs, and you have over pairs and they don't, and you just punish.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Just
my fear with like playing two sizings on the flop is I'm lazy, not lazy, but sort of autopilot minded. And sort of understudied to the point where I'll end up, and I think this is probably fine in like 55s, maybe 109s and below, like I'll end up just putting all my good hands in the big size and all my shit in the small size.
Yeah, I understand that.
Don't tell anybody though, but that's probably what's going to happen if I play big size, small size. So.
Sure, yeah, I get it. And I mean, like, you've got a lot going on when you're playing, right? So, like, most people are just playing when they're playing, right? Maybe they're listening to music, but like, you're streaming, you got to manage technology when things go the wrong way and shit. So you got a few more considerations. So I understand, like, trying to simplify it a little bit, just make your life easy. How do you think about the turn?
The turn, I guess some of the weaker hands in my range, or some of the, bluffs, natural bluffs that I have improved. Like my 9-10 suited's improved, my queen 10's made Broadway. So I'm going to lose some of these hands that might consider bluffing, like they're the nuts now. So it probably works quite similarly, I'd imagine, to the spot we looked at before where, my king X is a pair, my jack X is a pair, I have all my pairs, so I probably need to start bluffing. I still have 7-8 suited, I suppose. But like maybe we need to start drawing in some bluffs from the ace X part of my range. And maybe a hand like ace 10, because like this does strike me as a turn where we could get chit raised. Like some of his calls improve to hands like be it jack 9, king 9, queen 10 that are going to want to play chit raise. So like maybe a hand like ace 10 is better suited to checking behind. I guess my initial preference is to have hearts so that he's just folding out, I don't know, like ace high diamonds, spades, and green cards, clubs, given my small sizing. So maybe I start bluffing some like suited hearts, like ace high suited hearts. But maybe this also bluffs too, since like it's an ace high that isn't really worth too much.
So this one is harder for the reason you mentioned, which is this is a situation where so the difference between this one and the last one, where the turn was the 4, right? Yeah. Is this card's way more threatening, right? Yeah. So your opponent's going to have straights now, right? That's a problem. I mean, he's going to have a fully weighted queen 10 offsuit, so that's a problem. Yeah. He's going to have pair plus draw now, so he's going to have really good bluff catcher calls, right? So he's going to have like queen, jack 10, queen jack, king jack. Sorry, I apologize. King queen, king 10. So maybe less king queen. Because that's going to check raise the flop. So, but yeah, so he's got a lot of combo draw, like pair plus draw. He's got the nuts straight at a full weight. So that's going to get in the way, essentially, of your ability to value bet thinly, right? So whereas in the previous situation, you were up against, it was like, so if we go back, actually, because I think
he was capped at like queen 10, right? So my king queen was just like, do whatever you want. Exactly. Like you have full license, just like do whatever the fuck you want. Like we don't really have that like over pairs can't do that here. Like top pairs can't really do that here.
Right.
So we got to be more careful, right?
Yeah. So in this situation, the strategy overall is the same, right? And so in this situation, I was talking to you about basically trying to think about it as like a purpose-driven strategy. Like you're not betting just so that you have a betting range, because that's not really logical, right? You're betting to do what? You're betting to try to get stacks in. Okay, with what hands, right? Kings, aces, but also king, queen, and even queen, jack. Like those would be fine, because this player is going to check raise out of king, queen on the flop. They're going to check raise out of the hands that beat those hands. So you can bet to get stacks in with a lot of different combos. Now over here, you really can't. Now you still want to do maybe a similar thing, and I wouldn't fault someone if they wanted to bet down, if they wanted to like make their biggest bet size here pot, because they're worried about the really strong hands in their opponent's range. I think that's a reasonable answer. It's probably something I would do. My biggest bet size here would be pot. I wouldn't be trying necessarily to get stacks in. But even if my biggest bet size here is pot, because I'm concerned about my opponent's nut ratio, the frequency that they can have really strong hands. Even if I'm doing that and I'm betting a little smaller, so I'm not overbetting, the total number of hands that qualify for that bet are going to be relatively small compared to the previous situation.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when we think about what we talked about on the river in the previous hand, we spoke about how if you don't have so many, you can only bluff as often as you basically have value bets, right? Like you have a bluff to value bet ratio that's dictated by your bet sizing, and your bluffs are obviously going to be easier to have than your value bets, right? In most situations. Mm-hmm. And your bluffs can't run away from your value bets. Okay. So you've got to be disciplined about not bluffing too much in a situation where you don't have many value bets. Now, in this situation, you lose a lot of air because the 9 will fill out, 10-9 suited and queen 9 and queen 10, right? So this turn does subtract air, but it comes at the consequence of also subtracting value bets, because you don't want to go thinly here. You don't want to value bet very thinly. So this is more of a check, I would say. I would check from this part, mostly because I don't want to get too carried away with my betting range here. I don't want to value bet king 10. Yeah, right? That's the difference. Is I don't want to value bet king 10. That's probably the easiest way to to communicate it.
So the bluffs now come from, like, where are we bluffing?
So you could still bluff with trash. So you could still pull the bluff from, say, so first of all,
so like 6, 7 suited, 7, 8 suited, this sort of shit.
Yeah, 6, 7, 5, 4, 6, 5, whatever that trashy shit will be. And you can pull it from gut shots. So you could have, for example, queen 8 suited, I guess, on the suited side. You wouldn't want to have queen 7 suited from here. So it'd be like queen 8 suited, something to that effect. So you can still bluff with those. You can still bluff with some ace highs, but on the ace high side, personally, I would formulate the range is I would be very disciplined in terms of both suit selection and kicker. So I would be biased towards, for example, ace 3 of hearts, ace 4 of hearts.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we want to unblock the clubs, diamond, spades, so they can check.
And go as low as we can to unblock faults.
Exactly.
Like potential faults if he has like queen 8 of clubs on the flop or something, right?
Sure. So I'd go something like an ace 3 of hearts, ace 4 of hearts, ace 5 of hearts, something like that, and then call it, maybe keep going, maybe ace 6 of hearts, something like that, but then call it a day. And then how do you think about the river?
I guess it's pulling out even more of the hands that like I don't bluff queen 9. Like my whole queen X box fills, right? So going back to what we said, I guess like they're probably more relevant that like my 10-8 fills. My ace 10 makes something, right? So these hands aren't worth nothing now, or they're worth a little bit more, I suppose. So now I feel like our hand is a bluff. Like 7-8, as we just said, was trash on the turn, right? I mean, that's a straight. So like it's gonna have to come from ace high. The value bets I have gone up as well, like my ace queen is the nuts, queen jack, queen 9. I make some very good hands here, and I don't really have a lot left to bluff with, if not the a6 block. So I imagine we start firing this one now.
Yeah. So the main thing about this spot on the river is that you recognize what you did recognize, is that you recognize that all the bluffs are now going to come from ace high. Yeah. Necessarily, there's really no way around that. So we have ways that we would prefer to bluff with ace high, right? We would prefer to bluff with hearts, because that's still going to be broadly true, that the weakest parts of your opponent's range may include ace high, clubs, diamonds, or spades, or something like that. It's not inconceivable that they check call a small size with some hand like that. And so having hearts is probably going to be helpful. But yeah, your bluffs, you have no choice. They have to come from ace high. Do I want to bluff with ace 8 of clubs? Probably. I mean, I'd probably just do it anyways, because of how weak the opponent's range is, and the metagame, like the level of understanding in the metagame. I would bluff here. if I was playing the spot in practice. Do I think it's going to mix in a solver? Like it might. I mean, it might just have to mix in a solver. Again, the betting range is relatively polar, so you're gonna have a queen a lot when you're value betting, right?
So we just get to go big as in position, since we have the option just to check back 2 pairs if we want to. We don't really need to mix any straights into like a smaller sizing like we do out of position, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't blast at it, but I would still pot it, right? I wouldn't go to like a really small size. Your opponent also gonna have a betting range on the river here, where like they end up betting their own queen X at least at a fraction, right? So like they're not gonna have every queen they could possibly have necessarily on the river when they check. They're going to be missing some. And yeah, to your point, like I'm not going to value bet, really thinly. I'm not going to value bet like ace king, for example, right? Which is a hand that, again, I could have checked on the turn. It's a hand that's not inconceivable.
Do you play 2 sizes at the river? Like,
no,
we just pot. Like,
not here.
Okay,
here. Go ahead. What are you gonna say though?
So, like, the worst hand you value bet is what? King 10? Jack 10?
Yeah, King 10 probably.
Yeah.
King 10 probably, yeah.
No, I was just wondering whether you want to, like, play 2 sizes to value bet thinner, but I mean, I suppose not, since he has, like, King 3 through King 7 full weight, which, like, he catches with, right? So...
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting. It's tempting to play a smaller size and go thin.
And then play smaller size with, like, King Queen? If we have it,
yeah. The problem is your opponent also. Yeah, so you could do that too, right? You could start allocating, and you could split it that way. I don't think it's like a stupid idea, but I'm pretty comfortable with like a pot sized bet as the answer. In a spot like this where
like the EV we're gaining is just not worth the.
It's really risky in the sense that like your opponent's queen X ratio is high enough. Like it's not. Like it would be really awkward to bet like half pot and then have a second size where, like I know that I spoke earlier about not worrying about being check raised or not or like understanding my range better than my opponent and being willing to split for that reason. The problem is when I get check raised, I know that it's going to be a queen, and if I bet small, I don't know what the queen X board coverage I'm going to have. It's like I don't know if it's going to be significant enough to just like if someone chooses a big size, just like bail on all of the thin value bets that I would make, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it gets really tricky when your opponent's nut ratio is really high. I think so. That's why I would choose one size. That way, like when I choose one size, I have the luxury of knowing that I got a lot of fucking queens when I bet pot, bro. So like if you raise, you're gonna get called by a queen. Like it's just that simple. Like I'm not gonna have to pay you off really far down.
Yeah.
But once my queen X coverage gets lower, if I face a raised, I'm going to have to start calling without a queen. And that feels really problematic for me. Yeah, so I'd prefer to just bet pot and keep my life sane.
Agreed.
So I'd fade that hard problem. And yeah, so, this is kind of why it's tempting to fire here. I think this hand probably is pure bluff for the opponent. But this player just didn't understand. And that's my point. Like that's like almost.
This is exactly what you're saying about everything else you float on the flop fills up. Like this is like how else do you get to the river if not this, right?
Yeah, I mean, like how does this guy want to bluff the river, right? If he doesn't want to bluff with this, like if the 2x combos don't make the bluffs. Now maybe he specifically said, okay, Spraggy's air comes from the ace X block. Specifically, I don't want to bluff with ace deuce, but I am actually bluffing with like 8 deuce and below. Like that's a defensible line, like line of reasoning. And maybe he says, okay, so I'm not going to bluff with that, but I will actually bluff with like, I don't know, 10x or something like that, if to the extent he could have it. I don't know. But it seems really difficult for this player to balance out all of the strength that they're going to have.
Yeah.
If they're not willing to bluff with hands like this.
Yeah. And also in like an inefficient hold'em game like this probably is, like, how often does this go check and he loses to like 3s through 8s or like ace 10 or, like this feels like such a clean bluff. Like, so, like, very easy to hit.
Okay, like this. Looks good. Like the higher frequency c-bet strategy. And then you elected to check the turn. And again, I just kind of want you to walk me through how you think about it.
We're at a stack depth where he's going to slow play some flushes. It's a turn card that's going to give him some connectivity, picking up, additional outs, like obvious 4-5, 7-5, 6-5, making straight draws. Obviously, he makes straights with 5-8. still has some nut hands. I do have a reasonable amount of equity. We're at a depth where, you know, and a card that improves in where he could play check jam. So I don't think I really want to bet fold or bet call Queen of Spades. I guess my barrel is going to come from something more worthless, like, I don't know. Certainly not a card where I'm like barreling my entire range. Like, this is kind of a scary board for some of, you know, a lot of my hands. Like, if I bet pairs, like 7x or 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, I want to check. You know, some of my kings at this depth, I mean, maybe I do. I don't want to go 3 streets with all of my kings. Don't know. But, like, we're not betting range. Like, this is a turn that's going to improve him. He's going to slow play at this depth some. So we got to check some. And I have equity. I don't want to bet fold in a spot where he could quite easily check jam on a card that improves some of his hands. And he still has slow plays on flop.
So you are right. This card sucks. So the cards that suck the most will be the cards that are sandwiched. Now on this board, on the low end. Okay. So specifically, if the board were like King 7-5, that would mean a 6. So if the board were King 7-5 and the turn was a 6, that the 6 would be like one of the worst cards. It would be one of the highest frequency led cards for the opponent. If the board was King 8-6 and the turn was a 7, same idea. Turns King 6 or flops King 6-4, turn to 5, same idea. So the sandwich card leads the most. After that, it's going to be the cards like just directly under the board, so like a 5, or directly over like an 8. Unders tend to be a little bit more favorable for the opponent, depending on like how much interaction the opener has with as you go up. So yeah, this is a pretty bad card. He can probably lead this card. As a result of him not leading when maybe he could, you should probably assume that they don't know how leading works. This is not like an obvious lead turn.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it leads turn, but like when you are really suspicious of turn leads, that's like as a heuristic. Like if you think, oh man, I bet I'm supposed to see a bunch of leads here.
Yeah. Whenever people check there, I always get a little bit warier about barreling, because like that would strike me as they're not playing a lead strategy, so they still have all these strong hands that are supposed to be in the lead. Like, like low paired turns, right? Obvious one. Like, whenever I think this should be a lead, and a lot of the time, and it's not, then I'm like, okay, he probably doesn't play lead. He's probably got way more stronger hands, so like I should probably not barrel as wide as like Solver would like me to, right? Yeah. Because Solver's assuming that the strong hands have been pulled out, but if he's not playing lead, like here, I like Cut Spartak is actually good regular. Like I say, I don't know if he's playing a lead strategy on this card. He has a hand that doesn't want to lead, or he has 0 lead strategy. But if someone has 0 lead strategy here, then I guess we should barrel less frequently, right? Because he still has strong hands that should play lead in his range.
Yeah, so so you're right. In the extreme, you would bet 0%. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So, which is something that, like, you know, just as for people that play the game, is like kind of like an unlock, because like if you solve things at equilibrium, it never happens. Like you can run a million flops, I don't care. Like if you should bet 0, then your opponent will lead, and then once you input those leads, your opponent's check will get sufficiently weak that you now have a betting range. So if you solve things at quote unquote at GTO without any node locking or anything like that, without manipulating the ranges at all, you'll never see the in position player check 100%. It'll just never happen. But the second that you put out a board like King 7-6, turn 6, right, which is the example you gave, right, and then your opponent doesn't have a leading strategy there, you might check 100% of your range. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you might have 0 bets, and yeah, so like the observation that like, or the assumption that you're going to check a lot if they're not hitting those leads, that's correct. You might check everything. So I think it's a good turn though. Good check rather. I think it's a pretty good check. And I would bluff the river. That seems fine. Sucks.
F you.
Yeah, you're up. How do you think about this? In terms of size, that's mostly my question.
This is obviously a little bit more connected than some of the 10 high, 9 high boards who are talking about overbetting. You know, if this was rainbow and there were fewer straight draws at the bottom, somehow, I don't know if that's possible, maybe like 9-4 doos, then I would imagine I have some overbets or C-bets. Certainly, you know, pot overbet, whatever. My understanding is that when there's easier ways for my opponent to defend, like obviously the flush draw, obviously hands like 4-5, ace-4, ace-5, 5-6 straight draws, albeit only gut shots, like maybe we're a little bit more restricted. But with that said, my overpairs, you know, which is where the main asymmetry is going to come from, given my opener and his big blind defend, probably still want to play, you overbet or close to pot. Maybe I don't get overbets because it's two-tone and he can just pull defense from the flush draws. Some of those hands, equity goes like way down on a club turn. But I probably get bigger sizing up to pot with the strongest parts of my range. However, sometimes I just bet every board for 25% because I'm lazy. But I would imagine we get some bigger bets on here for those reasons, right?
Yeah, sometimes also you can, sometimes the language I use to define when I use two bet sizes would be like barbelling, right? So you go small or you go really big, right? And I call that barbelling strategy. Alternatively, you can just bet like bigger all the time, right? You can just bet like half pot all the time, right? Yeah. That's an easy answer for people to implement sometimes. This strikes me as more of the latter, where like you would potentially just bet like half pot all the time on a board like this one.
Yeah.
And that's just because this player doesn't have, like, this is kind of like a battle of 9x. I mean, this guy and you, either you have a 9 or bust, like you have a 9 or an overpair. This player has a 9 or bust. This player does not really flatting much of the 2x, 3x combos. Obviously, they have the 2 and 3x suited combos, but there's not as much on the offsuit side. So it's just a board where if you bet a little larger, I think things go a little better than if you bet this small. So this is just quite small here.
Yeah.
And you do a lot of checking with high equity holdings, right? So
yeah, that's what I said. That's why I was definitely, obviously, I'm not, saying that this is not a problem. These are hands from a little while ago, and this is something I don't know if we spoke about it before. I spoke about it with someone before about, like, as was mentioned at the top of the hour, like me barreling, like hands that can improve in position. I was just very gun shy of it entirely. Like I would just never do it, which obviously leads to all sorts of problems with my range of like not having flushes at the river when I like don't. If I barrel this turn, if I'm checking back on my flush draws because I'm like shit, I don't want to bet fold. Then when it's a green card river, I'm just screwed, right? Having barrels because I'm not barreling enough flushes in position. I never make straights when I barrel. I don't improve enough when I barrel. It's just a huge problem. And obviously I have 5 high here, so it would be nice given my sizing to fold out, ace high hearts. Or ace high diamonds, or whatever, ace high spades. So, like, not barreling these hands in position seems like a very big leak and something that I was aware of before the fact, but like very obvious when we look at some of the hands. So I'm just like never doing it, which for the reasons I mentioned seems just like a terrible overall strategy.
Cool. Well, I mean, like, you summarized it pretty well, so that's good. And yeah, I would just agree with you. I'd also say that this turn looks a lot more like the queen that we saw at the beginning of the session, right?
Right.
Where
really good for
when the opponent.
Yeah,
exactly. When the opponent check calls the flop, they're doing so with like a 9, a 3, a deuce, 5, 4, 6, 5, etc. They're not check calling the flop with a lot of Jack X combos just because they have Jack X, right? But if we're c-betting at a high frequency, and we should probably be c-betting range on a board like this, you bet small, so that's presumably what you were doing. If you're c-betting range on a board like this, then this is the card that subtracts a lot of the bluffs from our range. We're going to have Jack 10 off, we're going to have Queen Jack off, we're going to have King Jack offsuit, Ace Jack offsuit. We're going to have Queen 10s and King 10s for straight draws. So this is a big deal for us, but it's really not a big deal for the opponent, right? So this is going to be a card where, from a range perspective, we want to be shoveling in a lot of money. We want to be attacking and pushing things really hard. So, I mean, like, it's not to say that every single combo that looks like this is going to be pure bet every single time. Like, you can still do what you're doing. I'm not telling you can't.
Yeah, but I'm the other way. It's like really good cards to me, 5 high, and I'm just like never like, oh shit, I could make a hand here. I'm not putting chips in again, right? Which it's not only just like the turn, it's like the river. It upsets my range because my in position barrel is just like polar, and then cards that fill, I just don't have it often enough after I've barreled, right? If I play this strategy.
Sure. Yeah. Alrighty, brother. We'll call it there, man.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if you enjoyed the session, you want more similar content, then BBZPoker.com is Jordan's website. bigbluffzinc. Jordan's new bundle, the best bundle to learn at the moment. It's very suitable for beginners as well. The Simple Poker Systems bundle. I hope you all learned something. I certainly did. I learned a lot. I need Jordan to drum it into me because he fucking knows,